Hi, I'm James McGuire, editor of Datamation, and our topic today is the future of cloud computing, 2017 and beyond. To talk about that, we've got three experts, including Greg Neerman, actually Chief Technology Strategist at Hitachi. You've got a new title, right, Greg?
Yeah, but I don't think it makes me an expert, so we'll skip that part.
Your old title was like Chief Bottle Watcher or something, so you've come up in the world, perhaps.
Yes, a little bit. I got to act like an adult now, I think.
Excellent. Also with us is Bernard Golden, who Wired Magazine calls one of the top 10 leading experts about cloud computing anywhere. Bernard, how are you doing today?
I'm very well. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Sure. And also with us is Scott Sanchez, director at Cisco. Hello to you, Scott.
Hello. Thanks.
And Scott, do you have the word OpenStack in your job title? I've never been clear about that. Or is that just something on LinkedIn that's obsolete?
Yeah, it's not obsolete.
Obsolete.
I mean the title. I don't mean OpenStack itself. Yes. I mean the title.
Yeah, the title is probably more historical.
Okay, good. All right, that's what I meant. All right. So the future of cloud computing. This is a quote from Bernard. I think it might help us here. He says, and I quote, "I think the most important thing about cloud computing is how the big providers have moved way beyond the old model and now offer an incredibly rich set of services. Enterprises that want to build tomorrow's apps must focus on public cloud computing," which I take that to mean sort of a reference to AWS and the fact that a week doesn't go by or a month doesn't go by, they don't crank out a new and richer feature set. So where cloud used to be about outsourcing your data center, now it's like, well, there's a whole feature set there that doesn't exist, regardless of whether or not you have a data center.
Yeah, it's not just AWS. All the big three, and I guess I would include IBM in that as well. Mm-hmm. Sorry, my cat just woke up and said, "Now I want to travel."
We need to get your cat's opinions too, because I'm sure that he believes in cloud computing.
Anyway, they're all building out an incredible ecosystem of services. Mm-hmm. AI is an obvious one that all of them are focusing on, but Amazon and Microsoft both have big IoT stacks that they're providing to make it easier to build IoT applications or integrate devices into a full stack of IoT computing. And that's something that a typical enterprise is going to really struggle to try and put together themselves. And so really, if you're trying to build next generation applications, you're really going to be forced to this is live broadcast.
I like it.
You're going to be forced to really rely on those services. Yeah. And of course, your point was that these cloud providers are innovating at an incredible pace. And so really an IT organization, if they want to be anywhere near the cutting edge of what's going on, the frontier of what's going on in computing, they really need to be looking to the cloud providers to get access to that technology.
So I guess this means that the whole debate about private, public, and hybrid cloud is over, Greg, and public has won. Would you say so?
No, not at all. And I think the idea that you move everything to the public cloud is pretty absurd. Because I liken it, if you use the analogy of the commoditization of energy and electricity, it's a great example. Early on, electricity plants or coal-powered generators are built specific for a specific premises or a very small territory. If you look how that expanded out to a grid and became a commodity where everybody was accessing it, and then take that a step further, look what AWS, Google, and others are doing with power. They have backup generators, backup power, and they're also generating their own power, whether it's solar or wind or otherwise. And so I think that exemplifies how there's going to be a variety of compute resources, not just a public. It's going to be public, private, and hybrid. Now, granted, public's growing dramatically. Just last week, Pacific Crest released a study with CIOs that demonstrated that, I think with 2015, maybe 5% of the apps were in public cloud. 2015, I think it tripled. And they're projecting by next year that more than 50% of applications in the enterprise are going to be in public cloud. That same study also showed that there's a little bit of a boomerang effect, where 62% of those enterprises were bringing data back out of the cloud, back into their own enterprise. So I think there's a multiple of things, dynamics at play here that are happening, and it really plays itself into a blend of public, private, and hybrid cloud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, and Scott, you may want to comment on this. There's a recent Northbridge survey. It was a Wikibon and Northbridge survey. It just came out on Tuesday, and it talked about the division between hybrid, public, and private. And in 2015, it was 47% hybrid, and that number stayed the same in 2016. In 2015, it was 34% public. That number went to 30%, believe it or not. And in 2015, it was 19% private. In 2016, that went to 23%. So all that jumble of numbers says that private has actually saw some growth in the past year. What does all that mean, if anything?
I would take it to mean overall that the number of sort of cloud-ready, cloud-native apps, whatever you want to call it, is growing, right? And so the fact that private is growing and public is growing is just, I think, a realization that the market for places to run cloud-savvy apps that are built by cloud-savvy teams is growing, right? And that's good. You know, we're 10 years into this journey, so I'm glad that finally, you know, we're actually seeing people build these cloud-native apps. You know, to the question a minute ago of kind of the status of private cloud, I think the numbers are nice, but the realities are nicer. And what I'm seeing is that when people want to move fast, there's no doubt that the literally hundreds of services you can go out to the public cloud providers and consume right now is incredible. You know, Andy stood on stage a couple weeks ago and said, on average, we're releasing 3 new named things a day. You know, that's hard for IT teams to keep up with, even when it's Amazon doing it, never mind if they had to do it themselves. So, you know, when you want to move fast and just consume features, it's great. I'm seeing a trend, though, where internally people are using bigger boxes, right? Bare metal is becoming more popular than it was a couple of years ago. Bigger VMs that people are slicing up, things like Kubernetes and container stacks, right? And so the private cloud, I'm seeing a lot more for the sort of roll our own stack, build our own capabilities type of applications. And then the public cloud is more for, we're not really sure what we need, and so we're just going to keep using somebody else's features. And I think that's part of why you see those numbers for private continue to grow, is there's a lot of teams that sort of just need to create their own ingredients. And there's real value of doing that in-house.
What about, you know, thinking ahead, some things are getting more buzz and some things are getting less buzz. I mean, obviously the term serverless computing is a very hot term, which it requires a lot of servers to do serverless computing. What is getting hotter and what is getting less hot? And Scott, I'll throw it back to you, because I know that serverless computing is close to what you've been thinking about. And could you give us an 11-second definition of serverless before you talk about how hot it is?
Sure. There's people who love the name serverless, including a company who I think registered the name. But
who registered the name?
Serverless.
Okay.
They were just quick on the draw, I think.
Right.
But the idea of it is more function as a service. And any of us that have been in this business for a long time, you know, we sort of thought about this as service-oriented architecture. And you know, like, this goes back quite a ways. Even like the premise of Java, you could argue, was like, hey, you know, we're going to break all this stuff down into little chunks. I think the difference now is that the abstraction and the ability to execute them as functions has become a lot easier. And you see it with Google Cloud Functions and Lambda and other things that are just really making it easy to like drop a very defined set of code in, link it on both sides to how things come in and how things go out, and just run it and pay by the millisecond that it executes. And I think that's this movement of serverless. But you could argue, if you're being sort of an industry purist, that like, hey, we've actually been doing this function as a service thing for a really long time. The only thing that's gotten easier is how you deploy an individual function as opposed to more of a monolithic collection of functions.
What's your take in terms of like what is trending upward and what is trending downward these days, whether it's platform as a service or OpenStack or anything?
Well, from a perspective of execution environments, clearly containers are coming into the mainstream, and I think that's a very big trend. Kubernetes is clearly got a lot of momentum around it. So the serverless stuff is emerging, and I think it's going to be very powerful going forward for the kinds of reasons that Scott just outlined. And, I think, again, that what's happening is people are now building different kinds of applications. And so things like containers, very useful for that. Serverless, especially useful for that, because you can sort of say, I just need this function, I'm going to put it up there. I haven't, one of the great things about the Amazon version of it is you can tie those functions to, you can tie those functions to other sorts of things in the system, like S3 buckets or DynamoDB. So when something happens outside of this thing, something gets dropped into a bucket, it triggers off functionality. And so it's a very interesting way to sort of construct pipelines of activities. And, it's early days, but the kinds of things that people are building with them are really quite interesting. So I think we'll see a lot more of that coming forward.
What about the platform as a service model? Is that gaining ground, you think, Bernard? Or is that still, it's a small sliver. Is that small sliver going upward?
Well, having come from a platform as a service company, I have a strong affinity for it. It appears that Cloud Foundry's got good momentum and is being adopted. Kind of depends if you might put Kubernetes into that category, because it's certainly got momentum. And then, in a way that the big cloud providers haven't really said we're platform service. It's more like we have services as a platform. We have all this stuff, this Tinker Toys that you can construct stuff from. We're not going to define how you put it together, and we're not going to constrain you to what this functionality is. We're just going to provide you a wide range of services that you can assemble to build your app.
Greg, what's trending up and what's trending down these days? What's hot in your world?
I think it really depends on who you talk to. If you're talking to application developers, clearly Kubernetes is red hot. But I was just in Irvine, California yesterday at an event we were doing with end users, and the biggest concern that came up was how they're bridging their mode 1 and mode 2 operations, and how they progress as an IT organization within their enterprise when they're straddling these two worlds. Greenfield applications are very clearly being built cloud first, largely on public clouds, but they've got legacy systems that aren't easily migrated, and they're re-architecting and redoing the applications for those. And so they're challenged. It depends who you're talking to within the business about what's buzzing to them. But I would say overall, from a C-level perspective, it really is about how are they bridging these two worlds, without having to drop one. And I'm not a big fan of bimodal IT, but I think it does help describe the challenge that businesses have.
What about myths that we do or do not believe in? Scott, you had mentioned this, that quote, can we agree once and for all that no one moves workloads? I thought people did move workloads. So educate me on that one. What does it mean that people do not move workloads?
I guess it's sort of just a personal pet peeve of mine, that for a long time as an industry, we keep talking about moving workloads around. Like I'm gonna put it here and then I'm gonna move it there, and I think the hybrid that we've sort of come to realize exists is not I start here, I move it there, I move it around, because data and data gravity are real things, as evidenced by AWS pulling a tractor trailer full of hard drives on stage. Like once you move that in, you're not just gonna like drag and drop it back somewhere else, right? Like that's the reality of how stuff works. So I think what I'm seeing is more hybrid is less about moving things around, and it really kind of has never been about moving things around. If you look at what people do, it's more about connecting, and working for one of the great connectors of the world at Cisco, we see it in that people are having a harder and harder time as their apps run in more and more places, right? It might run on an old database inside of an old data center, and a more modern private cloud, and two different cloud providers, and pull data from Salesforce, that's their app, right? And I think connecting that is increasingly challenging, securing that, managing that. So it's not about like, oh, I move my database from here to here every time the price changes by 10 cents or something. It's more about, I'm trying to figure out how all the pieces fit together, how to connect them, how to secure them, how to manage them. And can we please stop saying, hybrid is about moving apps? It's really not.
If I could jump in on that, I think Scott's exactly right. I mean, when an IT organization puts an app someplace, it kind of is like, we put it there, it's working, don't touch it. And I think the reality is much that people are going to place apps a lot of different places, or they've got a lot of existing apps in a location. They're going to have a hybrid environment with a lot of different environments that they're going to be operating applications in. But this notion of migrating applications or cloud bursting and all this kind of stuff, I mean, people love it, love to talk about it. People love to think about it. People love to bloviate about it. But I just don't see it happening. I mean, applications and application placement and then moving them kind of reminds me of the old joke about the airplane cockpit of the future will be a pilot and a dog. And the pilot is there to feed the dog, and the dog is there to bite the pilot if he tries to try and touch anything.
Because it's all automated, yeah.
Because you don't want to screw anything up.
Right.
And that's what application placement is. It's hard to place an application someplace and get it up and running and working and, have all the stuff of like, oh, I can update it, and to sort of go, well, now I'm going to move it to an entirely different environment. I mean, that's a big, big decision, and it carries a lot of implications, a lot of work.
Right.
I just don't see that happening that much. So but people are going to use multiple computing environments. And that, I think, is the reality. And, you can call that hybrid. But to me, it's just you've got applications running in multiple places. And that's going to be the reality for the next 20 years.
Well, just to add to that, I think Scott's absolutely right. People aren't moving applications around like it's easy, but they are moving data around. And I think where this is going to be particularly evident is around IoT. When we talk about edge and core, as far as where those IoT and analytics processes are taking place. I think for some people it will be centralized, like a public cloud. For many, it's going to be decentralized because they're going to need that compute power at the edge. And so I think while the applications are going to be stagnant and not jumping around, the data will be, because they're, especially again, as IoT is collecting data points from wide different geographies. How it's processed and analyzed is going to require quite a bit of movement.
Do you think, and I guess I'd ask you this, Greg, see if I can successfully derail the conversation, is that the complications and the sophistication of cloud is leaving the C-suite further behind? Because issues like where is the app placed, hybrid cloud, what is serverless?
No.
Are they more involved? It seems like the old-fashioned data center days were far more simpler for those folks, and now it's like, gosh, someone needs to help us with this more than ever.
No, you know what? I don't think the C-suite and the business units care or want to know where it lives. They just want to know that it works, right? And so people that are, especially if you're in a regulated industry like banking or insurance or healthcare, where that data physically sits and how that application actually functions is really critically important to them. But I think to the C-suite, they're looking for a service level. And they want to be able to know that they're going to be able to operate and not have downtime, and they want to be able to manage risk. So we're not having conversations about public-private hybrid with the C-suite. It just doesn't happen.
Scott, do you see this as this new world as being so fathomably more complicated and leaving some upper executives behind, or is it they're keeping up with it just as they did in the old data center days?
I would say that they are more aware now of the capabilities that are available, because they hear it, they read about it, they see their competitors perhaps doing better things than they are, and the technologies people are using, used to just be locked away behind closed doors. You sort of had no idea unless, big vendor X came in and sort of,
Right.
told them, here's the secret recipe for this stuff. But, now anybody can read an article every day about how this bank or this manufacturer, this, hospitality chain assembled these 12 services to do something magical. And you got the folks up in the boardroom going, are we using that stuff?
Right, but they themselves can't make a decision about using those 12 tools, can they? I mean, they're not in a position themselves to.
No, I don't think they're ever going to be like, well, we should use Google Cloud Functions over Lambda, right?
Right.
They're not going to be at that level, I don't think.
Right.
But they are going to say, hey, how come they got this to market quicker than we did? And it seems like there's all these capabilities. To what extent are we using them? Can we invest further internally or externally to make sure that we're doing the right things for our business? And I think that's the benefit of sort of the visibility that the public cloud providers have lent us as an industry, is that when people want to envision the future of their business, they've got a clearer picture of what's possible.
Bernard, do you agree that, or disagree that things have gotten so unfathomably complicated the C-suite is being left behind, or do you think those folks are keeping up?
Well, I'm not sure who you're putting in the C-suite, because if you're talking about a CIO or a CTO, those carry C titles,
right? They would be right on top of it in theory.
Right.
I think that they do have to know about this stuff and have to be acquainted with it, and I think they probably are pretty engaged with it. If you're talking about a CEO or a CMO or a CFO, I suspect they're not going to know as much about the details of, how does the Azure IoT stack work?
Right.
I mean, probably not.
Right.
But I think they are, and this sort of echoes what Scott was saying, they look out and say, I live in a world where people expect to be able to buy my stuff or engage with me or whatever. It's IoT infused, IT infused. I mean, every product and service is now going to be a smart product or service.
Right.
So they're not going to say, I think you should use this IoT stack versus that IoT stack to build this thing. But they are going to say, I got to have a smarter widget that's, that's comparable to the widgets coming from my competitors.
Right.
And so they're going to be putting pressure onto those CIOs, CTOs, whatever you want to, those roles, saying you've got to deliver those kinds of applications, those kinds of capabilities. I think a bit of a worrying thing, if I can say, is, I've sort of heard the trend that, who's going to be setting the pace in corporations is going to be chief marketing officers. They're going to be doing all the technology stuff, or chief digital officers. I'm a bit fearful that they believe they can provide this kind of capability without really understanding the technology underneath it. I just don't think that you can kind of go, we're going to do a really smart device that communicates back to a central place that, downloads the analytics and whatever it is, without really understanding how that gets put together.
Right.
And I think if you don't have that kind of knowledge as part of that initiative, it's going to end up being lame.
Well, let me put a little bit of different context, a spin on that. I think people, I don't know if it's going to be the CMO, but certainly line of business. If we look at the adoption of Salesforce.com, that was largely adopted by VPs of sales, not the IT department. And they were pushing IT to, can you do something better than this? No. Well, we're signing up for Salesforce because we see value in the tools. Now, does that VP of sales care about how that operates? No, he wants a service level agreement. He wants to know that the availability of that. He wants to know what the costs are to him and his business, but he doesn't care how the sausage gets made or how Salesforce operates or even where that data lives. Now, I would caution some probably do care where that data lives. It depends on the industry that they're in, but a lot of folks in VPs of sales don't want to be concerned with that. They just want to make sure it's available and their people in the field are able to execute and do their job to make sales and not have any downtime.
Let's take a moment as we kind of wrap up to look to the future. What is going to be big in 2017? I would say even forget the distant future. What's going to be big next year? We're going to see some big headline come, March, April, May, June. Scott, what is going to be a huge cloud development in the year 2017?
I'll give an unpopular answer, and I'll just say more security breaches.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Because
it's perennial.
I think, if you, this isn't like a knock on the public cloud providers at all. It's a knock on the users of them. That the individual services might be great. They might be really secure on the back end, but when you start tying them all together and building apps out of them without really truly understanding how they all work, sure, you could put some firewall type VPC things around them, but then you punch holes back into your enterprise and you've got this hybrid situation. I think security is going to be, unfortunately, more in the spotlight, and that people really need to, I started my career on the security side of the world. So, I think we're sort of coming full circle. When the internet got hot, no one really thought about it. And it was like 5 years after everybody started doing anything meaningful that it was just like breach after breach after breach. And we saw a couple unfortunate examples this week of like, oh, we only lost 1 billion records. Don't worry about that. We'll be fine.
Right.
And so I think you're gonna see more of that because it's being used more. There's more services and there's more people doing it that have not been sort of classically trained in security. They've grown up in the last 5 years when they just didn't think they had to care, and now they're in the wild, wild west. So
well, that may be true. I mean, I think it's established at this point that generally the public cloud providers are probably safer than actually most individual businesses are.
I wrote a blog post I don't know, probably going on 7 or 8 years ago about how public cloud, which at that point was in the early days, is probably more secure than your own data center, because your own data center has like 8,000 holes punched in it for business partners and other relationships, and they've got one, it's the internet, and they keep track of it really well.
Right.
And so I don't know, I probably still maintain that position, but it's about your apps. It's about how you secure your data. It's about how you architect things, how you monitor it, how you tie it all together. And certainly we see companies doing it, making the right investments in the right places, and I hope more do. So,
Greg, what's a big headline for that we're going to see in 2017 and for cloud computing?
Well, I certainly think I think Scott nailed it. I think the big thing for cloud computing is going to revolve around security breaches and how data is shared and accessed. I think there's going to be more awareness of at least more transparency between how at least the U.S. government is accessing and requesting information from cloud providers, which they right now, generally they have to be quiet about it when they get a request for it. So I think there's going to be a growing call for transparency, particularly in the U.S. I think Europe's already well on that path for transparency. But I think that leads itself into how that comes to the broader issue of control of data and how data is being accessed, who has access to it, and how do you best manage that. And I think that's going to become more of a prevailing issue. I think Scott's absolutely right when it comes to security. But as we all know, and I think, Scott, you touched on it there, even the best security from a public cloud company isn't going to stop the human error of people implementing and sharing or divulging keys and other information. People are still generally stupid sometimes on clicking things. And so that's going to lead to bad decisions and risks that can't be controlled just by technology.
Well, I keep my password written on a little Post-it note on my desktop. I hope that's secure.
Yeah, just put your camera on it so we can see it.
Okay, good. Bernard, what's going to be the big headline for 2017 in cloud computing? It's going to come out, say, in March and April, and you're going to be so prescient because you named it right now.
Yeah. Well, Greg and Scott, you guys are such Mary Poppins and so bright and cheerful about things. It's I'm trying to think about something really,
jetpacks and cloud computing.
I think what we're going to see next year is machine learning and AI. And that's really the province of these big cloud providers, because they can gather enough data to do the training data sets. And we are already in the throes of that, and we're going to see much, much more of that as companies start applying that. And it's going to be amazing and wonderful and awe-inspiring and terrifying all at the same time.
Terrifying indeed. I know we talked about this, the Uber driverless cars, driven by AI, of course, or some version of AI. And what's going to happen with all those drivers if this actually takes off? I assume it will in the next few years. What's going to happen with all those Uber drivers and other drivers?
I've been telling all my Uber drivers lately that they should learn how to code while they're waiting for fares.
Yes.
So that when their job goes away, they're able to sort of build the next version of themselves and get paid for it.
Do they seem receptive to that plan, Scott?
Some people are. I'll just say that.
All right, good deal. Fantastic, gentlemen. Thank you very much. A lot of good stuff. I'll send you the link. We can tweet it. And I greatly appreciate your expertise.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for the invitation.
Okay. All righty.